It was supposed to be an ordinary stop, just a quick trip into a gas station on a rainy evening, but for one black man in a gray hoodie, that simple act turned into a nightmare. Within minutes, whispers turned to suspicion, suspicion became fear, and fear brought flashing lights, sirens, and a full SWAT team pointing rifles at his head. He hadn't committed a crime, he hadn't even spoken, yet he found himself face down on the pavement, drenched in rain, humiliated in front of a crowd that didn't know his name, only his skin. Tension hung thick in the air, seconds away from disaster. And just when it felt like the world might collapse on him, he calmly said 5 words that stopped the heavily armed officers in their tracks. Words so unexpected, so powerful, that they didn't just diffuse a crisis, they forced everyone present to question what they thought they knew about identity, power, and the silent weight of prejudice. What were those 5 words, and who was this man really? It was a rainy Friday evening in the quiet town of Harlow Ridge, the kind of small place where people nodded politely to strangers and everyone knew the name of the high school football coach. Thick clouds loomed over the streets as the storm settled in, wind hissing through trees, the kind of weather that made people move faster, heads down, just trying to get home. The gas station off Highway 9 was barely busy. Just a couple of customers grabbing snacks and one teenage cashier watching the clock. The bell above the glass door chimed sharply, drawing everyone's attention. A tall black man stepped inside, water dripping from the edges of his soaked gray hoodie. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just kept his head slightly lowered as he walked toward the back coolers. His shoulders were broad, his steps quiet. The cashier, Emily, barely 17, stiffened. Something about the way the man moved made her nervous, but maybe it wasn't how he moved. Maybe it was just what he looked like. Behind him, an older white man at the coffee station leaned toward his wife and whispered, "He looks suspicious." The woman frowned. "Should we tell someone?" Less than 3 minutes later, someone outside made a 911 call from the parking lot. "There's a guy here, he's just standing around, black male, hoodie, might be armed, looks like trouble." Back inside, the man quietly selected a bottle of water, then reached for a bag of trail mix. He carried himself with purpose, but not urgency. Still, Emily's eyes didn't leave him. His hands were visible. No sudden movements, no words spoken, yet the fear in the room spread like a fog. Unaware of what was being said outside, the man brought the items to the counter. Emily barely made eye contact as she rang them up. He offered exact change, waited for his receipt, and nodded politely before turning toward the exit. The second he opened the door, red and blue lights bathed the parking lot. 3 police cruisers pulled in fast, tires spitting water as they came to abrupt halts. "Hey you, hands where we can see them." The man froze. He blinked at the lights, confusion flickering across his face. He raised his hands instinctively, a small plastic bag still looped around his fingers. From inside, customers ducked behind aisles. Emily gasped and covered her mouth. "Get on the ground." One officer shouted, advancing quickly with a hand on his holster. The man began, but another voice cut him off, "Down now." For a moment time stretched unbearably thin. The man slowly knelt, placing his items on the wet pavement. Then he lay flat, arms extended, palms open. His heart thudded in his ears. "What is happening? Why, I didn't do anything." He winced as one officer pinned his knee against his back, patting him down roughly. "No weapon," the officer said, frowning, "nothing on him." Another leaned into the cruiser's radio. "This doesn't feel right," but the call said he matched a suspect. He bought trail mix. A voice from inside the store whispered, still filming through the glass. Before anyone could make another move, a loud growl of tires screeching on wet asphalt split the air. A black armored van pulled up, slamming to a stop like something out of a war zone. The letters HRST, Harlow Ridge Special Tactics, were painted in white on the side. The back doors burst open. Officers in full tactical gear, faces hidden behind helmets and shields, stormed out with military precision. Assault rifles pointed at the man's back. A booming voice from a megaphone shouted, "Do not move." The man lay completely still, rain soaking through his hoodie pooling around his face. He didn't dare speak. His fingers curled into the pavement. All around, spectators gathered, neighbors, passers-by, and strangers, phones raised, their voices rising in disbelief. "What did he do?" someone asked. "Why are they treating him like a terrorist?" But no one could answer. No one knew who he was. No one had asked, and as the armored boots closed in around him, the man felt something shift, not just fear, but anger. Something deep, familiar, heavy. He had been here before. Not this exact moment, but this exact feeling. Judged, mistrusted, flattened by fear that wasn't his to carry. But this time he wasn't going to stay silent. Not this time. The rain turned violent, pelting down in sheets, soaking everything in sight: the pavement, the police uniforms, and the man now lying face down in a shallow puddle. Water seeped through his hoodie into his skin, chilling him to the bone. But it wasn't the cold that made him tremble. It was the weight of the officer's knee pressing into his back, grinding into his spine with a force that felt more about dominance than safety. "Don't move," the officer barked, his voice sharp with adrenaline. "I'm not," the man said, his voice muffled by the pavement. "I'm not resisting." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he shoved the man's left arm further up behind his back, hard enough to make his shoulder burn. The man gritted his teeth and closed his eyes. He knew this script, how quickly things could spiral. He had seen it play out on news reports, heard it in community meetings, and felt it in the hearts of friends who didn't live to tell their side of the story. Around the parking lot, a crowd began to form, drawn by the flashing lights and the sheer spectacle of force. People stood in stunned silence, umbrellas rising like question marks in the rain. Some had started filming on their phones, capturing every moment as if their recording might save a life or serve as evidence if it didn't. A woman stepped forward, her voice trembling. "What did he do?" One of the uniformed officers, arms folded, replied without hesitation. "He matched a suspect's description." The woman narrowed her eyes. "What description?" "That he's tall and black and wearing a hoodie. That could be half the boys in this town." Another voice piped up, this one from a young man leaning against his car, still recording. "I was in the store. All he did was buy water and trail mix. That's it." Tension rippled through the crowd. Murmurs began to grow louder. This wasn't looking like a takedown. It looked like a public shaming. Inside the SWAT van, the air was tense but sterile. Fluorescent lights flickered above banks of screens showing body cam footage, drone feeds, and thermal imaging. The SWAT captain, a stern man named Richards with decades of field experience, leaned in close to one of the monitors. "Do we have confirmation he's armed?" he asked, his voice low and clipped. A younger officer checked his headset, fumbled with a tablet, and shook his head. "No weapon found, nothing on him, not even a pocket knife." Captain Richards furrowed his brow. "Any warrants?" "No priors, no match in the system. Name hasn't even been verified yet." Richards exhaled slowly. His instincts told him something was off, but protocol kept his hand steady. "Hold him until backup arrives. We proceed by the book." The younger officer hesitated. "Sir, the crowd's growing. They're filming." "I said hold him," Richards repeated. "We don't know who he is." Out in the rain, the man's fingers curled into the pavement. His breath was steady, but his heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. He could hear the voices around him, the questions, the disbelief, the disgust. He wasn't sure which hurt more, the weight on his back or the way no one saw him, only the shadow they thought he might cast. And then, the moment that changed everything, one of the officers stepped closer. His hand moved toward his belt. Crowd noticed. "He's reaching for his taser." Someone shouted, "No, don't." A woman cried out. The officer paused, staring down at the man with narrowed eyes. Rainwater trickled off his helmet. His fingers hovered near the grip of the taser, shaking slightly. The man, still lying face down, knew that this was the edge of the cliff. One wrong word, one twitch. One misplaced breath, and everything could end, so he said it. 5 words, calmly, firmly, as if he'd been waiting to say them his whole life. "Call the Secretary of Defense." The officer froze. "What?" he said, blinking. The man lifted his head just enough for his voice to carry through the downpour. "Call this Secretary of Defense." The silence that followed was instant and absolute. Even the rain felt quieter. The taser, hand dropped to the officer's side. Confusion spread from face to face like wildfire. From inside the van, Captain Richards stood up so fast he knocked over his chair. What did he just say? The younger officer scrambled to replay the body cam footage. The captain narrowed his eyes. Repeat that to Central Command right now. On the pavement, the man remained still, breathing slowly. The crowd watched in stunned silence. He wasn't just another suspect. He wasn't just another story. And in the next few minutes, they would all find out exactly who he was. In the cold, merciless rain, the man lay still, water streaming down his face and soaking into his clothes. But his voice was calm, controlled, even. Amid the shouting, the tasers, the rifles, and the stunned crowd, he spoke 5 words that didn't belong in that moment, that didn't match the scene. Call the Secretary of Defense. Silence fell like a hammer. The officer crouched over him blinked, confused, unsure if he heard correctly. What did you say? The man slowly turned his head toward the officer, his cheek pressed to the pavement, and repeated, this time louder, clearer, call the Secretary of Defense. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd. Phones caught every syllable. Behind the barricade of bodies and bulletproof vests, even some of the SWAT officers glanced at each other in disbelief. Inside the command van, Captain Richards froze mid-step. What did he just say? He asked sharply. Playback confirms it, sir. The young officer replied, his fingers tapping frantically at the screen. He said exact words, call the Secretary of Defense. Twice. Who the hell is this guy? Another team member muttered. Richards didn't answer. Instead, he reached for a secure satellite radio and keyed in an emergency channel code known only to high-level personnel. The line crackled, a brief pause, then a clipped response on the other end. Central Command, state your clearance. Captain Thomas Richards, Harlow Ridge SWAT. We've got a civilian on the ground claiming code red clearance, requested direct contact with the Secretary of Defense. Identification unknown. We need confirmation. There was a long pause, then a voice replied, transmitting biometric scan protocol. Use on body cam for facial match. Outside, the man was slowly helped to his knees, hands still raised, but no longer pinned to the ground. An officer stepped forward with a body camera, holding it close to his face. The man didn't flinch. A minute passed, then another, then the radio came alive again. Identification confirmed. Stand down immediately. Subject holds Omega clearance. All units are to disengage. Captain Richards' eyes widened. Omega clearance. He echoed. That level of access didn't even exist in their standard protocol files. Only a handful of individuals in the entire country were granted it. Black Ops specialists, high-security liaisons, and senior defense architects. Another message came through. Subject is Dr. Malcolm A. Ridgway, former Deputy Director of Advanced Threat Analysis, Pentagon. Clearance redacted for public record. Do not detain. Repeat, do not detain. The captain didn't hesitate. He stormed out of the van, rain pelting his helmet, boots splashing through puddles. His face was pale as he reached the man still kneeling on the pavement. The crowd, silent now, parted for him like a wave. Their phones were still raised, but their questions were gone. Everyone could feel the shift. Captain Richards removed his helmet as he approached. His voice, previously laced with command, was now soft. Sir, he said, then knelt down and gently pulled the hood away from the man's head. There was a long breath, a moment of recognition. Oh my God, Richards whispered, it's him. The man's face was unmistakable now, strong jawline, piercing eyes, streaks of gray at the temple. Not many people outside the inner defense circles had ever seen Dr. Ridgway up close, but those who had never forgot him. He was the man brought in after 9/11 to identify invisible threats before they struck. The strategist behind counter and filtration programs the public would never know existed. A man who disappeared from headlines years ago and hadn't been seen since. Ridgway stood slowly, wiping water from his brow. He looked over the officers, the SWAT team, the gathering crowd. His voice remained calm, though a razor-sharp edge now lived beneath it. I was getting water and a snack, he said, facing Captain Richards. That's all, no weapon, no threat, just a hoodie and skin you didn't recognize. The captain lowered his eyes. Sir, I'm not your sir, Ridgway interrupted, not harshly, but with the weight of truth. I'm the man your system didn't expect to look like this. Behind them, people began murmuring again. Not in fear now, but awe, realization, shock. The crowd that had filmed his humiliation now filmed something else entirely. A reversal of power they had never imagined. The same officer who once pressed him into the pavement now stood rigid, his eyes wide, unable to meet Ridgway's gaze. Dr. Ridgway exhaled, eyes sweeping across the town he'd once left behind. They remembered the man in the hoodie. Now they would never forget who he truly was. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, as if the storm itself was catching its breath. Dr. Malcolm Ridgway, no longer the mysterious man in the hoodie, was gently guided into the SWAT van, not in cuffs, but with officers clearing a respectful path. Some of them saluted him, others averted their eyes, unsure how to face the man they had just treated like a criminal. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the doors to the armored vehicle closed behind him. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. Tension hung like fog in the air. The screens flickered with security feeds, maps, and biometric readings, but all eyes were on the man now seated across from the SWAT captain. He removed the damp hoodie slowly and sat up straighter. The silence was unbearable, so he broke it. "I'm Dr. Malcolm Ridgway," he said plainly. "I designed the AI threat response protocol your entire division uses. I was part of Project Hermes, led the framework for predictive counterterrorism models, and just last month." He paused, then added, "I briefed the president in the Situation Room." Gasps rippled through the van. One of the tech officers, barely in his 20s, went pale. "The Malcolm Ridgway, but you vanished. They said you retired, went dark." Ridgway gave a tired smile. "That's how it was meant to look." He leaned back in the seat, rubbing his temples, then continued in a voice soft but weighty. "I was on my way to visit my mother's grave. She passed 2 years ago. Every spring I go back to the town I grew up in. Just me, no security, no ID tags or briefcases. I didn't bring credentials. Because I wasn't planning to interact with anyone, I thought, maybe, just maybe, I could be a normal person today." He looked around the room, meeting each officer's eyes one by one. "I bought a bottle of water, some trail mix. I said thank you to the cashier. I walked out, and somehow that made me a threat." Captain Richards swallowed hard. His face was lined with remorse, confusion, and the weight of consequences. "Sir, we didn't know. If we had any idea who you were, Doctor." Ridgway raised a hand to stop him. "That's the point," he said. The room fell silent again. "The system isn't broken." Ridgway continued, his voice sharp now. "It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Profile, target, and neutralize based on fear, not fact. I built systems meant to predict behavior based on data, patterns, risk, but no model in the world can account for the way people treat each other when they see only skin, not soul." He looked toward a young black officer seated quietly near the corner. "You know this feeling, don't you?" The young man nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, too well." Dr. Ridgway leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I didn't come here to lecture. I came to mourn. But I ended up becoming another headline that almost happened." He pointed toward one of the monitors still showing a paused body cam frame, his own face pressed against the pavement. "That image will follow me, not because of who I am, but because of what I represent. A reminder that no clearance, no degree, no title can shield a black man from suspicion when he's in the wrong neighborhood wearing the wrong clothes." Captain Richards looked down, ashamed. "You have every right to press charges, file complaints, the city council, the DOJ, whoever you want. I'll make the calls myself." But Ridgway shook his head. "I don't want revenge. I want change. I want you all to remember this moment, not because I turned out to be important, but because you were ready to destroy a man before you knew his name." He stood slowly, rainwater still dripping from his sleeves. "One day," he said, "you'll stop asking who is he and start asking why did we assume that's the world my mother hoped for. That's the country I still believe in even when it fails me." The captain nodded, his voice low. "Understood." Ridgway turned to the door, pausing only to add, "I'll walk out now, not because I was cleared, but because I should have never been held." And with that, the doors swung open. He stepped into the gray light of a town that was no longer as quiet as before, followed not by handcuffs or shame, but by questions none of them would ever forget. A week had passed, but the town of Harlow Ridge was still buzzing. News vans lined the streets. Reporters from state and national media crowded the sidewalks. Camera crews jostled for space in front of the old brick building that housed City Hall. At the center of the scene stood a wooden podium draped with the town's flag. And behind it, calm, composed, and wearing a crisp navy suit, stood Dr. Malcolm Ridgway. Flanking him on both sides were members of the town's police force, community leaders, and yes, even SWAT Captain Thomas Richards, who now stood with his helmet off and his hands respectfully folded. The man who had once pressed Malcolm into the pavement now stood behind him, not in authority, but in support. The murmuring crowd quieted as Dr. Ridgway approached the microphone. He didn't need notes. His words had been carried in his heart for years. His deep voice cut through the afternoon air. I was humiliated not because I did anything wrong, but because I looked like someone you fear. A low ripple spread through the crowd, half guilt, half realization. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't resist, I didn't reach for anything but a bottle of water and a bag of trail mix, but still someone saw me and assumed the worst, and a system that should have protected me sprang into action to punish me instead. He paused, letting the silence breathe. Let's stop pretending bias doesn't exist. Let's stop acting shocked when systems fail people who look like me. This isn't about shame, it's about change. A few people clapped. Then more. Within seconds, the entire crowd rose to its feet, applauding thunderously, not out of pity but out of respect. Dr. Ridgway stood motionless, absorbing it all, knowing that this applause wasn't for a speech, but for a truth finally spoken aloud. When the crowd settled, he continued. Change doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins in the hearts of those with the courage to admit something is wrong. The problem isn't just the bad apples. It's the soil we keep planting them in. I wasn't profiled because someone was evil. I was profiled because they were conditioned to fear, to distrust, and to act first and ask later, and that can be unlearned. Behind him, the police chief nodded solemnly. The mayor blinked away tears. Dr. Ridgway turned slightly and gestured to the officials behind him. These men and women could have hidden behind policies and press statements. They didn't. They chose to stand with me today, and more importantly, they've agreed to take action. A murmur of curiosity filled the air. The mayor stepped forward, cleared his throat, and took the microphone briefly. Starting this fall, Harlow Ridge will implement a town-wide training program mandatory for all law enforcement officers, city employees, and emergency responders. Not just bias training, not just lectures, we're doing something different. He glanced at Dr. Ridgway, who gave a small nod. The training will be led by people who have lived it, by those who have experienced profiling, injustice, and harm. We believe empathy is the most powerful form of education, and our first instructor will beat Dr. Malcolm Ridgway. The crowd erupted again. Applause, cheers, even a few tears. Children on their parents' shoulders clapped. Teens who'd seen the video go viral held signs that read, "I am not a threat," and "See me, not my skin." Local businesses offered free food to attendees. Schools brought their civics classes to watch history in the making. The atmosphere was electric, like the moment just before lightning strikes. As the press swarmed to ask questions, Dr. Ridgway gave one final statement. Those 5 words, "Call the Secretary of Defense," were never meant to show power. They were a reminder that you never know who someone really is. Behind every face is a story you don't see, and sometimes power you can't imagine. But the real power isn't mine. It's yours, the power to listen, to learn, to see. And with that, he stepped down. That fall, true to their word, Harlow Ridge began implementing the most progressive de-escalation and empathy-based training program in the state. Other towns took notice. Journalists called it the Ridgway Reform. Universities studied the model. Lawmakers discussed it. But to the people of Harlow Ridge, it was simpler than that. It was the day they stopped asking, "Who is he?" and started asking, "Who are we?" And those 5 words, they became more than a phrase. They became a symbol etched into a plaque outside City Hall, and into the memory of a town forever changed. Dr. Malcolm Ridgway never asked to be a symbol, but his experience became a turning point for the entire town and far beyond. What started as humiliation born of ignorance ended with a powerful message about dignity, perception, and justice. People began to see that change doesn't come just from policies. It comes from moments, from voices, and from truth spoken at just the right time. His 5 words echoed far louder than any siren, forcing everyone to look in the mirror. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Hidden Realities, where we uncover powerful truths behind everyday lives. What would you have done in Dr. Ridgway's place? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, sometimes a single sentence can shake the system.